Today's talk is called I Don't Have Time, and it's one in a series of talks this year under the broad category called Stuff I'd Rather Not Talk About. I chose each of these talks because there's a pain point in them for me. There's some level of friction, agitation in them for me. And these things also are common enough to the human experience that they create a nice on-ramp for folks who may have no background in Zen, to come to some sort of an understanding of maybe the perspective Zen has on this. So we've got several people in the community of folks who are going to watch this. We've got people, some of whom are on the call today, who are longtime practitioners of Zen. Deep Zen. They're doing koan training with a teacher. They've passed koan training with a teacher. They've been sitting for decades, practicing the martial arts and the fine arts. And then we've got a second group of people who maybe come to this through our sister organization, the Institute for Zen Leadership, which Whitelaw Roshi founded and runs. And for those folks, they don't all have to be Zen practitioners. They just go through the Institute's courses. And then there's a third group, and that is people who have no familiarity in Zen, but might just be interested in the topic. Maybe they've had some face-to-face combat with some of these issues. So the intention again is that no matter where you are in your understanding of Zen or in your practice of Zen, all you need for these talks, this series, Stuff I'd Rather Not Talk About, is experience in the human meat suit. That is all that is required. So again, today, we're going to be talking about this phrase, I don't have time. I don't have time. I've said it thousands of times myself, and I want to start with a little bit of framing and how it's personal to me. Feeling that I don't have time is a very familiar feeling, and I want to go to the feeling, and I want to encourage you within your own experience. Can you remember a time when you didn't feel that you had time? Too much was being asked of you. You know, maybe you were doing 4 jobs at work instead of your normal 1 job, or maybe you've got the sandwich situation, or you've got aging parents and you've got maybe still kids at home, or kids who really are dependent on you. Maybe you were thrown into a life circumstance where you or someone you really love was diagnosed with an illness or some sort of a condition that required a lot of time and attention, especially in those first early days, and you were still trying to juggle everything else, right? When our life doesn't have a lot of margin in it, every additional thing that gets added, it feels like it could cause life to sort of spill over the edges. And then what are you going to do with that mess? And can you feel into your own experience? I mean, as I'm even talking about this, I can feel some muscles across my rib cage begin to tighten. You know, I've noticed for myself, with my deep familiarity with this feeling of being time starved, that it feels stressful. And for animals, there's a fight, flight, freeze that often happens, and I tend to freeze. I tend to get a little hunched over, which causes all of the front of my body to get tight, and I feel stuck. When I have this feeling of not having enough time, I don't know what to do first. And it feels like no matter what I choose, because I'm not choosing the other things, I'm somehow in trouble, or I'm not spending the right amount of attention on the right things. This is a very embodied habit for me. It's a very embodied habit for me. So for yourself, what does time starvation, that sense of time starvation, how does it show up in your body? You know, you might even want to just recall, kind of like how I did, like what does your body do when it feels this pressure to rush, or this pressure to hurry, or how does your body respond to time starvation? Keep that in mind. Maybe even jot yourself a note about it, because we'll have a discussion towards the end of the talk where we'll come back and revisit some of these things. The thing I want to point out, though, is for many of us, if you too have a very intimate and familiar relationship with the sensations of being time starved, you've started to develop some patterns around it. Some patterns and embodied patterns, habits, right? You have some habits around this. And I've gone into my own habit, you know. Why do I get time starved? I get time starved. I feel like I don't have enough time because I overcommit to things. Why do I overcommit to things? There are two reasons. One is because I'm a pretty spontaneous person, and generally there's nothing anybody ever asks me to do that's a bad idea. Somebody asked me to go for a walk. That's a great idea. Yes, I want to go for a walk. Somebody asked if I want to grab a drink or grab dinner. Love those two ideas. Love to enjoy a drink, love to enjoy dinner. Yes and yes, right? There are people whom I really love who ask me to do things. I can't say no. I love them, right? But then if I get really, really dig deep down into my own habit about creating the conditions where I feel like I don't have enough time, you know where it all comes from? Wanting to be liked. Wanting to be liked. And we all want to be liked. I mean, it's part of our social contract that if we have a reputation as being somebody who is liked in the tribe, people aren't going to steal our food. People aren't going to slit our throats in the middle of the night. Like, this goes deep, 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 deep into our human DNA, you know, wanting to be liked or at least accepted. It creates reputational capital within our societies and with our community. So that's normal. But for me, there's an abnormality that lays right alongside of that and has kind of gotten twisted into it, like one of those ficus roots, that it's like a three-parted root system, trunk system. And the part of me that is in this habit of saying yes to too much and then becoming time starved is that when I was small, my adoptive mother told me, and it was during a time when I was naughty. I don't know what was happening. I can't remember that. But I was being naughty, and she said, "We can take you back," meaning back to the foster home. And I was like, wow, okay. And so being on good behavior, making sure she liked me, making sure that I made her happy became part of my survival. So, you know, individual results vary, but many of us who create these conditions in our life again and again and again, there's something deeper that's causing us to kind of go around this wheel of suffering more than one time. And that's part of, you know, that's something that's in me. It's something that's in me. But, you know, the way this works is you say yes, and you say yes, and you say yes, and you say yes. And it's almost like if you've ever watched the, you know, any of these home editing shows or the KonMari shows, where the first thing KonMari does is she says, okay, if we're going to clean up your house and we're going to order your house, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get all your clothes out of the closet and put them on the bed. And so that's the first step, right? Is to get all your clothes out of the closet. And on these television shows, it's amazing how many clothes pour out of some of these closets and different floors of closets. And oh, the other place where you store clothes, right? And you know, there's usually the moment where you're aghast, eyes are wide, yours and the actual person it's happening to, where you're like, holy crap, that's a lot of clothes, right? Well, that's my relationship with making commitments, you know? I say yes and yes and yes and yes. It's like I stuff so many things into the closet. And then from time to time, when I can't even jam the closet door closed, I've got to open the closet. I have to take out all my commitments. because the feeling of being time starved is now not just a feeling, there actually is a commitment problem here, right? So when I hit that point, that's usually when I start to edit, right? And when I start to think about how can I stop creating these conditions for myself? You know, it's like, how can I stop creating these conditions for myself? So even if you have a different individual experience of feeling time starved, I bet you felt into one of these things. I bet you felt society's pressure to be busy. You know, we have sort of an addiction to busyness, an addiction to so much. Like, how early do you get up? Oh, how early do you get up? How late do you have to stay up? How late do you have to stay up? How much work did you do? Or, oh, you seem so busy. I saw this firsthand. I was flying through Dallas, Fort Worth. So I live in Madison. I flew Madison to Dallas, Dallas to, I don't know exactly where it was. It may have been Tucson. My sister lives in Tucson. And I was on a really early flight out of Madison, so early that the boarding time in Dallas was like 6:30. And as we were getting onto the airplane, you know how the flight attendant is always at the entryway to the airplane and she's saying good morning or hello to the passenger, she or he, in this case it was a woman. And she greeted the passenger in front of me, and this is how their conversation went. She said, well, hello, you know, how are you today? And the passenger said, I'm so tired. I had to be at the airport at 5:30. And the flight attendant said, I had to be up at 4:30. And it was like they started to sort of get into and outdoing each other in the level of time and busyness connection, because the passenger reported, well, I had to be up at 3:30 to make it to the airport by the time I needed to be at the airport. So it was kind of like they were trying to outdo each other. And it was kind of funny to watch. And when you start paying attention to just everyday conversation, oftentimes the questions that we get to quite quickly are, what are you doing? How busy are you? There's a societal urge for busyness. It is countercultural to slow down. It's countercultural to slow down. I mean, I remember when I started going to Zen trainings, and oftentimes these start on Thursday nights and they end on Sundays at noon, or through IZL, that is a typical course. Starts on Thursday night, ends on Sunday morning, and people would hear, oh, you're going to a Zen training, that must be nice. Thinking, I don't know, I was gonna drink wheatgrass shots and like, it was gonna be relaxing, because the truth is, Zen is far from relaxing. The purpose of Zen is to help you unlearn every habit since you were born, to resolve dualities, which, you know, isn't a head game, you know, it's an embodied game. You know, so even talking about things like Zen retreats, right? Like, oh, it must be nice. People always kind of made me feel a little guilty if I said I was doing anything Zen related. And certainly, like, if people take time off work, right? Or go on sabbatical, there's often a like, it must be nice, you know? And that comment has a little edge of like, you're lazy, you must not be a hard worker, maybe you're a wimp, maybe you can't hack a real job. And all of that just seems to come out of that Protestant work ethic that America as a country was founded on, and other countries have it too, right? That you know, there's something spiritually purifying about being a really hard worker. So why wouldn't we have a society of workaholics or busyaholics or people who are chronically time starved? So there are conditions that we create for ourselves that lead to a sense of not having enough time. And it's also in the societal waters in which we swim that there is a current of expecting you to be overcommitted, right? Expecting that you're going to be busy at all times, and busy in a way that people recognize as busy, like working or volunteering or caring for others. There's an expectation. So I would argue that this sense of being time-starved is, at best common, and at worst expected. That you're expected to operate on this very thin margin of rest, of restoration. I think about our doctors who report incredibly high cases of burnout. And I don't know about you, but does anybody want to be treated by a burned out doctor? Like, no, I mean, it's like the snake eating its own tail. It's like a self-licking ice cream cone. Like, nobody wants that. But the societal pressure to be time-starved is very real. So although I come to this with my own habit of being time-starved, I know that I'm in good company. I'm in very good company. So check in for yourself, maybe even give yourself a little rating right now. On a scale of 0, I feel like I have more than enough time for everything, to 10 being, I don't even know how I'm spending any time watching this talk right now. Where are you? Where are you on feeling time-starved? And when you give yourself that rating, what does that do in your body? If you're at the 0, you're probably like, hey man, like your shoulders are down, your breath is low in your body. Even when I was like, hey man, it's like surfer dude, right? Like, I got this, no problem, right? And if your number was maybe 8 or north of 8, 9 or 10, you maybe thought about just leave meeting, right? End show. There are so many things I have to do. Stick with me. Stick with me. You're going to have a completely different experience, a completely different embodied relationship to time if I do my job right here. So now it's time for the program where I deconstruct the phrase. As I'm in my 4th of this lecture series now, I've started to develop a little bit of a rhythm of how I do these talks. And I'm going to keep doing this rhythm until it's not useful anymore. But the rhythm is to lay the context, which we've just done, and then to pull the phrase apart. And the phrase again is, I don't have time. So let's start with I. Who is this I that doesn't have time? Who is this I? If you've ever said aloud, I'm so mad at myself, who is the I that is mad at the other I? Like, which one are you? Are you the you that is mad, or are you the you that is being mad unto? Right? This whole question of I, who is this I that has no time? In my case, when I utter that phrase, I just don't feel like I have enough time. The I is just this embodied habit. It's just this body of habits that takes on too much, says yes too much, wants to be liked too much, gets a closet full too much, freaks out, empties the closet, and around the wheel we go. Is that really who I am? It's one of the central questions in Zen. Mind, body, self, other, life, death. These dualities that we create for myself. So who is this I in I don't have time? Who is that I? In my experience, that's my small self. It's my small self, not my big, expansive self. Both are true, but the I that doesn't have time is just that tangle of habits that keeps me playing small, keeps me in my lifelong habits. So I don't is the negation of the word have, don't have. I'm going to take that as a cluster. To have or not to have. Have, that word have, intimates possession, doesn't it? Possession. Like, I have this inkin, this bell. Right now, I'm even holding it. You could say I really possess it, right? So I'm holding it now. It's my possession. If I set it over here, I don't have it in the same way that I just did when I was holding it, but it's still mine. I mean, I still, right? It's mine. But what if I give it to you? Is it still mine? Or is it now yours? Having something in one's possession. We, in Zen, you may know if you've partaken of any of the Buddhism, we often talk about attachment, right? That we sometimes set up our whole habit of identity based on what we have. I remember I was at the Spring Green Dojo once, and I was sitting on a chair in the kitchen, a stool in the kitchen, and I don't know if I got up too quickly. Somehow I and this stool got tangled with each other, and the stool fell over backwards, and it dented the refrigerator. I don't know how to get a dent out of a refrigerator. And I felt terrible. This isn't my property. This is in Pat and Gordon Green's house. And I had dented their refrigerator. And I felt terrible about it. Pat wasn't home. Gordon was. Gordon didn't seem to really care, but I thought, oh boy, I'm not looking forward to telling Pat that I dented her refrigerator. So as soon as she got home, I think she was traveling. And as soon as she got home, I called out to the house and I said, have you noticed that ding in your refrigerator? And she said, yes. And I said, I did that. She said, I know. And I said, I'm really sorry. And if you want me to buy a new panel, say the word and I will do it. And she said to me that when she was training with her teacher, something that was a really important possession of hers, I can't recall what it was, it broke. And her teacher said, good, now you get to practice non-attachment. The deeper meaning being, things come into our lives, they leave our lives. Things are all in one piece, things break. But when we cling to that idea that we have something, this is my inkin, then if it gets taken away or stolen, I don't know who would steal this, right? It's like a part of me dies, This isn't me, right? It's something I'm gonna ring 1,000 more times in my life, but do I have it? Don't I have it? Who cares? Right? That attachment, so the words have and don't have, they get at that clinging feeling, or sometimes that longing feeling. And now let's go to the final word in this phrase, I don't have time, which is time. Time. I want to deconstruct all of time for just a second, but just think of the concept of having time. Having time. This is so highly conceptual, right? I mean, time is not like something you add to a glass of, it's not like water in a glass. You're like, I have water in a glass. Having time is completely conceptual. I mean, you can't store it in a bank. You can't store it in a cup, right? I mean, even if I take my watch off, right, that keeps time, and I put it in a glass, does that mean the glass now has time and I don't have time? It's crazy to think about what it means to have time or to not have time. I don't have time. I hope, in pulling apart who is the I, what does it mean to have or not have, and specifically how to have or not have time, this is a pretty porous, nonsensical phrase. But I want to take it further. I want to talk about the concept of time. And here's where I'm going to end. I'll do the spoiler alert up front. Here's where I'm going to end. Time is not outside of us. Time comes through us. Time is not something outside of us. Time actually comes through us. We were all sold a bill of goods when we were kids. We were all sold the Newtonian idea of time, that time is out there, and instruments like this track time, right? So it says it's 1:32 on my watch now, and I know I have to be leaving for the airport in about 2 hours. Whew, I'm racing against time. Time is not out there. The Newtonian notion of time that we still teach kids is not actually correct when you look at the science and the physics of it. Time is not something that exists outside of us. Time comes through us. We co-create time. And I know it sounds crazy, so let me just walk you through it. Let me start, just to confound us a little bit more and open yourself to the idea that the way we think about time is bullshit. The way we've been taught to think about time is bullshit. Let me ask this question. Why do you remember the past, but not the future? It's all time, isn't it? The past is the time that's behind us, and the future is the time that's ahead of us. But we can remember the past, but we can't remember the future. Why is that? And I just wonder if we can shift our perspective on time a little bit. So, if you look out across your horizon, like I'm looking out my window right now across the horizon, there's this argument of like, is the earth flat? But science and astronomy and physics tell us no, the earth is actually round. The planet we live on is round, even though it looks from our perspective, God, I can see right across to the other horizon. It sure does look flat. No, the earth is round. Or how about this? When you see the sun setting at night, it's lovely to see a beautiful sunset, isn't it? From our perspective, we think the sun is going down. But what's really happening, what do we know from science is happening, is we're tipping backwards. Our planet we are falling backwards, which is why the sun looks like it's going down. And so I want to limber up your thinking in those ways that just because we perceive something in a certain way doesn't mean it's actually true. So fact number 1, time passes faster in the mountains than at sea level. Time passes faster in the mountains than at sea level. It's provably true. If we could buy the high performance watches, right, we would know that time in the mountains goes a little faster than time at sea level. In the plains, there is less time than in the mountains. So lucky for me, as a flatlander, somebody who lives in the Midwest, people at sea level age more slowly because time passes more slowly. Now, the other thing that we know is true is that things move towards the areas where time passes more slowly. So if I got up, I'm 6 feet tall, if I got up and I fell down, I wouldn't fall to the ceiling, I'd fall to the floor. Why would I fall to the floor? Because the lower levels, of any given volume of space is where time passes more slowly. We just talked about it. Time passes more slowly in the plains than in the mountains. So as a mountain sheds an avalanche, the snow goes down to where time passes more slowly. We call this gravity. Now, I don't know how many of you remember physics. I know we have one PhD in our live room here who has a PhD in high energy physics. But Every physics equation is written with a letter T for time. T for time. But if we accept the proven fact that time passes faster in the mountains than at sea level, and we write our physics equations with time, it's like, well, whose time? Like, whose time are we talking about here? Are we talking about running this experiment like in the Colorado Rockies? Or are we talking about doing it, in the Dead Sea, which is at sea level, right? Because wherever we run this experiment, we're going to get a slightly different outcome because T is different at those different times. Now, I can actually feel in myself that I'm nerding out a little bit on this. So I'm going to pick up the pace of the rationale here a little bit, but stick with me. So time passes differently at different points. All of our physics equations are written with T for time. But the question is, what is the right time? What is the right time? There is no single right time because time is different at every point. Maybe not vastly different, but somewhat different. So, this is Einstein's great contribution. One of his great contributions is the general theory of relativity, which says that every phenomena occurs in its own time. Its own time. So right now there are many of us sharing space, but it is not the exact same moment where I am at my address in Madison, Wisconsin than where it is in yours. So time is actually relative, not specific. It's relative, the theory of relativity. Now, if we kind of go along with that, you may be wondering like, okay, Rebecca, if time is relative, it doesn't change the fact that my flight is leaving at 4:20 this afternoon, right? Like that's incontrovertible. But what I just want you to recognize there is that this time that we're talking about, this tick-tock time, chronological time, all it is a loose agreement. And I say loose because of time being different on different particular areas. So the need to create clock time is simply a way to help human beings keep agreements with each other, right? My plane leaves at 4:20 p.m. I know what time I need to be at the airport. I know what time I need to leave my house. It's very useful in that way, don't get me wrong. But it's, before Einstein discovered his general theory of relativity, he was working in Switzerland and he was working on this notion of time. And this was as we were coming around to the idea of like, okay, well, if trains are going to start moving people around, should we have schedules? And should it be the same time everywhere? And Einstein was like, oh my God, it's not the same time everywhere. No, right? So some of his own experience of trying to set time and keep people on time and determine train schedules, right, led him to this understanding that time is different in multiple different places. Now, I think you're probably with me. So far, you can kind of see the logical order of this. But I want to break this down even a little bit further, right? If you are with me, that time goes faster at the mountain level, and slower at the plane level, then if we created two timelines, let's say a 24-hour timeline at sea level, that 24-hour timeline would be a little bit longer at the mountain level. Are you following me? Right? So time passes more slowly at sea level, time passes more quickly in the mountains. So therefore, if we took the sea level 24-hour period, the endpoints would be a little wider up at the mountain level. So what we have now is almost the shape of like the top of a funnel. So at sea level, we're talking about 24 hours of tick-tock time. At mountain level, it's actually a little bit more. Now, Think of that funnel as being made of, I'm trying to think of a really loose goo, right? So the shape of the funnel is in a really loose goo. So what does that mean? That means that between mountain level and sea level, right, you can kind of move this around a little bit. Why can you move it around a little bit? Because science tells us that time is not something outside of ourselves, but time is coming through us. So there is both the element of time and the element of what is happening in the time. What is happening in the time. So phenomena are happening in all of these different points in time, and they are not disconnected. So the pedestrian way that we sometimes talk about this is that when a butterfly's wings flap, it can create a thermal dynamic, a much bigger thermal dynamic out in the world because of how that butterfly at that moment in its own time horizon, wherever it is between sea level and mountain level, it touches and impacts other things, molecules and energy waves and maybe even dust particles, right? And those things then interact. There's this chain reaction that happens. So there is not one particular time. Time is related to the phenomena that is happening in the time. So when we think about this cone of time and things happening, this goo, there's an undulation that can happen in the time phenomena dynamic, and we're all a part of it. I know you guys are like, holy shit, Rebecca, you are getting way woo-woo, you are getting way out there. But some of you have actually experienced this. Some of you have had an experience where maybe you're born with some super sensitivity. Maybe you just have a really strong connection to another person, but you experience things as they're happening with that person, right? So the easy example is somebody flashes across your mind and you find out that they were thinking of you at the same time, or they had an experience that they later told you happened at that time. The craziest experience I've had is my sister Sarah, almost 5 years ago to the day, his birthday was April 22nd. She was due with her baby. And one night I laid in my bed with the worst stomach cramps, undescribable, like pain in my stomach. I was like, what is this? It wasn't food poisoning. I've had food poisoning. It wasn't menstrual cramps. I was incapable of having those at the time, right? It was this visceral felt experience. And then I got the text in the middle of the night from her husband, Sarah's in labor. Now you can say that's a random phenomena, but I know how this works. And there is that interwebbed connection. If we switch from the science of this time, space, phenomena, interpenetration, and if you want more on the science, The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli is fantastic. If you want more about the science of all that we don't know about time, because we still really don't understand time. Let's switch now to the Zen Buddhism concept of this. So Dogen, founder of the Soto lineage of Zen Buddhism, he was a master with language, and he would invent words. And what I love is Rovelli comes at the phenomena of what time is from the science. And Dogen, and this is the text that I love on Dogen's fascicle on Uji, Dogen comes at it from the Zen perspective, and they land in the very same spot. And so what Dogen was great at was putting words together in ways that were like, oh my God, this is it, you know? And what he did was he put the word U next to the word Ji, and it creates being time, being time, being time, being time. We're going to come back to it in just a second, but I want to take it one little step further. Pulitzer, I think she won a Pulitzer Prize. Ruth Ozeki wrote a book that was one of the Wisconsin Reads books, where, you know, everybody at the university and, you know, people in Wisconsin are encouraged to read one book. She wrote a book several years ago called A Tale for the Time Being. And she happens to be Japanese, but she has clearly penetrated this concept of being time. She calls it being a time being. And in her terrific book, she talks about humans as time beings, which gets right to this notion that our existence is what is creating time. Time is not out there, a pressure on us. The truth is that time is coming through us, through the phenomena of our being, through the phenomena of what we are doing. So the way that Shinshu Roberts writes about this, I want to read what she's written so that you can hear sort of the Zen perspective on this. So remember when I talked about that funnel of goo? And it's like all kind of related. There's the time funnel in the plains, it's 24 hours. There's the top of the time funnel in the mountains, it's even longer. And if you think about all of what's happening everywhere as kind of being connected in this very loose goo, you could say that every particular atom of that goo is a position. So there are millions of positions all connected with each other, right? And in Buddhism, we call it a Dharma position, a Dharma position. So Shinshu Roberts writes, a Dharma position holds all being time. A being's time and time's being in this very moment. So what is she saying there? She's saying, in this moment are all moments. And in all moments are this moment. In this moment are all moments, and in all moments are this moment. This is the complete non-duality of things, or phenomena, you might call them, existence and time. I'm going to leave it there for now, just in the interest of how long my mouth has been running. But what does this mean for us? What does this mean for us? It means, first of all, that when you feel time starved, you have bought into the delusion that time is outside of you. When you say, I don't have time, you're just being part of the problem, right? So if you shift into a posture of even exploring, like, time is moving through me. As I think about that in my own posture, if I think I don't have time, I'm in that delusion, time is outside me. I told you I get hunched. I tighten the solar plexus, you know, especially around the solar plexus, and I freeze. But when I recognize my true nature, oh, time comes through me. Time runs through me. These things are co-created together. We are all co-creating together in this moment, and it's all connected. Something much bigger starts to feel possible, right? So the hacks that I use for myself is, number one, I use TikTok time very discerningly and discriminately. I don't have a clock in my bedroom, because I noticed that when I would wake up and I would look at the time, I would start telling myself a time-based story that would usually keep me awake. By not having a clock in my bedroom, I can't fall into that habit of telling that time-based story. Also, my discernment of using time is I use timers a lot. Now, this sounds counterintuitive, but here's why. If I know that I have to catch a flight at 4:20, that means I have to leave my house by a certain time, I set a timer for 10 minutes before I need to leave so that I can be completely interpenetrated in the moment, wholehearted with whatever I'm doing until my watch tells me you have 10 minutes until it's time to leave. So I use the idea of tick-tock time so that I can be time and be fully present, completely wholehearted, completely interpenetrated with what I'm doing. Why? Because in my own experience, when I am completely wholehearted, when I am completely interpenetrated into what I'm doing, I'm giving it my absolute full attention. Instead of letting part of my thinking mind go to what time is it, I need to keep an eye on the clock, but no, I'm going to be all in this. You know what happens? Things are a dance. Things are a complete joy. Things are beautiful and brilliant, and more seems possible than seemed possible when I was in the negotiation with time. So I stopped the negotiation with time. Right? Use it when it's useful to keep agreements, to not be late for my airplane. But beyond that, be completely in whatever this is that's happening right now. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to open it up for questions. I am going to pause the recording. So I want to end with some hacks. Not all of these are Zen hacks, but how do you get out of your I don't have time and into your being time, where the field of possibilities are infinite, where you're not in time starvation, you're in time creation. One of the ways is to practice. And I have found several things in my own environment that are really useful. Animals don't have time. So when you're spending time, Bethany, with your animals, when I'm truly spending time with my cat or one of my dogs or puppies, right? Puppies and children they are outside of time, and they're also fun. So it's a way of enjoying timelessness in a fun way. Why do Japanese doctors now recommend nature baths, that you spend time in nature? Because nature doesn't subscribe to this bullshit delusion of time either. Nature is doing its thing. It is being tree, it is being water, it is being what it is. I remember when my wife and I spent 8 days off the grid, living on a very primitive site at Isle Royale in Lake Superior. We didn't see anyone for 8 days. When you have those experiences in the natural world where there is no time, that's real. That's real. Coming back to this habit of time deficiency is not real. It's the delusion. It's the group shared societal delusion. Of course, I would also say that the way to break the delusion of being in this cage match with time, it's zazen, right? I remember one time I was cooking soba noodles with Honda Roshi, and I did not know how long these noodles were supposed to cook. And you know what he told me? I was like, what should I set my timer for? I had a watch on and everything. And he said, give it 3 breaths. And if 3 breaths aren't enough, give it 4. So it was just like right back to how many breaths this was, right? So it was a way to practice my breathing and to get the buckwheat noodles out on time. And then speaking of Honda Roshi, I'll close with this. In in Ginny's prior talk about the habit of freedom, Hondo Roshi was there, and he talked about hitting the reset button. And this works for breaking any habit, and it'll work for breaking the habit of you and time being separate from each other. And here's the 3-step reset. When you notice that you're starting to feel time starved, boop, hit the reset button and just broaden your viewpoint, broaden your perspective so that you can see eyes 180 degrees. So you're not like, when I get time starved, I get focused and laser pinpointed. Broaden it out. Feel your breathing. You can even do the test. I still do this. Put one hand on my chest, one hand on my belly, and I just breathe and try to make my belly hand be the hand that makes the movement with my breathing. Get into that breathing. Lower that breathing, because when your breathing is up here, you're probably fighting time. When your breathing is down here, you and that power pack of yours are being time. And then the final set of the 3-step reset is feel your toes in the earth. There's nowhere to fall. There's nowhere to fall. You're connected right now. So eyes 180 degrees, belly breathing as low as you can, toes in the earth. So with that, be time.